You hear it before you see it. The scraping of metal against stone, echoing through corridors that haven't known light in centuries. Your hands are raw, fingernails split and bleeding, but you keep carving. One more cross, one more line. Because if you stop, if you surrender to the silence pressing down like water, then everything you were, everything you loved, everything you believed, dies here in the dark, and no one will ever know you existed. The year is 1470, but the women scratching prayers into dungeon walls, beneath an empire's greatest palace, don't know if it's day or night anymore. They only know they're still breathing. And that terrifies their captors more than any army ever could. Before we descend into what happened to them, I'd love to know where you're watching from. It still amazes me that a story buried for 5 centuries can find its way to you wherever you are in the world. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's make sure these voices aren't silenced again. Now, let's go back to where it started. Not in the dungeons, but in a place where bells still rang and women still believed the world made sense. The convent of St. Catherine clings to a mountainside in Thessaly, like a prayer carved in stone. For 140 years, its bell has marked the hours, calling 23 women to prayer at dawn, at noon, at dusk. The rhythm of their days is as unchanging as the mountains themselves. Matins before sunrise, tending the herb garden where they grow feverfew and time for healing. Vespers as the light fades. Their lives are small, deliberate, woven from silence and devotion. Sister Eleni, the abbess, is 47. Her hands are calloused from years of tending the sick in villages that paid in turnips and gratitude. She came to the convent after the plague of 1448 took her entire family in a single week. The other sisters think she's strong, unshakable. They don't see how her hands tremble when she holds the Eucharist. Sister Magdalena is 19. 2 years ago, she watched raiders burn her family's farm. Her father died trying to save their oxen. Her mother and sisters simply vanished. The convent was the only place she felt safe enough to sleep without nightmares. She still wakes sometimes, gasping, reaching for a hand that isn't there. Sister Theodora is 70. She's outlived 2 abbesses, 3 bishops, and more wars than she bothers counting. Her knees are failing, but her voice is still strong. When the younger sisters are afraid, she tells them stories of martyrs who sang hymns while Rome burned. On the morning of April 3, 1470, the bell rings at dawn. But before the echo fades, another sound rolls across the valley, deeper, rhythmic, the sound of 3,000 feet marching in unison. The Ottoman army doesn't appear on the horizon. It materializes like a flood, red banners streaming, the air thick with dust and the metallic smell of armor in sunlight. They've been moving through Thessaly for 3 weeks, a calculated sweep through the last unconquered territories of the Byzantine world. Most villages surrendered without resistance. A few fortresses held out for a day, maybe 2, before the cannon spoke. But the convent isn't a fortress. It's 23 women, a vegetable garden, and a bell. Sister Eleni gathers the sisters in the chapel. Some are crying. Some are praying so quietly their lips barely move. Magdalena is staring at the altar, her face blank, already retreating to that place inside where raiders can't reach. "We will not fight," Eleni says. Her voice is steady, though her hands are clenched so tight her nails draw blood. "We will not run. We will do what we have always done. We will pray." Outside, the army surrounds the convent, but they don't charge. They don't break down the gates with battering rams. Instead, they wait. This is the history they never teach. The Ottomans did not conquer solely through force. Their victories were measured, deliberate, born of patience, strategy, and an acute understanding of the human mind. Fear, they knew, could be a sharper weapon than any sword. A broken mind often yielded more than a slain body. 17 years earlier, in 1453, Sultan Mehmed II had entered the Hagia Sophia, the crowning jewel of Christendom, and declared it a mosque. He did not demolish it. Destruction breeds martyrs, and martyrs inspire rebellion. Instead, he transformed it quietly but irreversibly. Mosaics plastered over, bells melted down, the altar replaced with a mihrab pointing to Mecca. Within days, the call to prayer rang from domes that had echoed Christian hymns for 9 centuries, a subtle erasure, cloaked as mercy. And it worked. By 1470, the method had sharpened. Christian communities, monasteries, and convents were approached with precision. First came the offer: convert, pledge loyalty, and you will be protected, even rewarded. Refuse, and you would be relocated, not executed, but taken to Constantinople to face the Sultan's judgment firsthand. The first cannonball hits just after noon, shattering the bell tower, raining metal fragments into the courtyard where sisters tend their herbs. Ottoman soldiers enter, not with swords, but with ledgers, quills, and ink pots. Every object, every woman catalogued. Here, people are assets, fear is the currency, and conquest wears the guise of order. A translator steps forward, a Greek man from a nearby village. His voice shakes as he reads from a scroll, and you can hear shame buried in every syllable. By order of Sultan Mehmed II, all subjects of conquered territories must submit to the authority of the Sublime Porte. Those who convert will be granted protection. Those who refuse will face consequences. Sister Eleni steps forward. She's trembling, but her voice cuts through the courtyard like a blade. Tell your Sultan we have already given our lives to a king. We have nothing left to surrender. The officer in charge, Hassan Pasha, whose name appears in Ottoman military records from the Thessalian campaigns, doesn't respond with anger. He smiles. It's not a cruel smile. It's almost gentle, pitying. He's seen this before. That night, the women are locked in their own chapel. No food, no water. Just darkness and the sound of soldiers outside, laughing, eating, living, waiting to see who breaks first. 2 younger sisters begin to weep in the corner, but Magdalena, barely 20 years old, begins to whisper a psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Then another. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. One by one, the others join her. And slowly, the weeping stops. This is the moment Hassan Pasha underestimated them. These women had spent their entire lives preparing for suffering, fasting, vigils in the cold, hours of silence, submission to something greater than themselves. What the soldiers saw as torture, the nuns saw as their daily discipline. But Hassan Pasha is patient. He has time, resources, and a power the nuns cannot match the weight of an empire pressing behind him. On the second day, a servant arrives with bread and water. Real food, clean water. He places it silently before them and departs, leaving only the quiet echo of his steps. The nuns stare, throats raw, stomachs hollow. The younger sisters glance at Eleni, eyes wide with desperation. Sister Theodora, eldest of them, speaks first. They want us to take it, to feel gratitude. To soften. Eleni shakes her head. Then we fast. They touch nothing. By the third day, their lips are cracked, hands trembling, yet they remain unbroken. Hassan Pasha watches from the courtyard, arms folded, impressed, frustrated, and perhaps fleetingly. A hint of respect crosses his features. On the 4th day, he offers one last choice: conversion and comfort under the Sultan, or a perilous journey to Constantinople, where the Sultan may hear their plea. He warns, the road is long. The weak do not survive it. Eleni meets his gaze. She sees the broken, the praying, the resolute among her sisters and replies, "We will walk." They leave at dawn, 23 women, hands bound with rope, walking south toward the coast. No carts, no horses. Just their feet and the dust and the sun that shows no mercy. By the 2nd day, Sister Irene collapses. She's 62. Her knees have been failing for years. She tries to stand, but her legs won't hold her. The soldiers don't wait. Magdalena and another sister, Anna, lift Irene between them and carry her for the next 3 miles. When they stop for the night, Irene is unconscious. By morning, she's gone. They bury her with their hands, no tools, no ceremony, just dirt and whispered prayers. Hasan Pasha makes a note in his ledger. 22 remaining. By the time they reach the port of Volos 7 days later, only 18 are left. But something happened on that road, something the Ottomans didn't anticipate. The nuns stopped weeping, stopped begging. They walked in silence. But it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of women who had already made their choice. On the morning of the 7th day, Hasan Pasha calls for Sister Eleni. She's brought to his tent alone. What happens next isn't described in Ottoman records. It's described in a letter from a Venetian merchant who witnessed the aftermath. A letter discovered in 2003 in the archives of Dubrovnik. He writes, "I saw them bring her back at dawn. She could not walk. Her eyes were open, but she was not inside them anymore. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert. But when I passed close, I heard her lips moving. She was still praying in Latin. Silently, she had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul to wander." This is the Ottoman strategy history doesn't teach you. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. They wanted ghosts. Women who would walk, talk, breathe, but would never be whole again. Living proof that rebellion was futile. Sister Eleni walked with them the rest of the way. But she never spoke again, never looked anyone in the eye. She was there. But she wasn't. At the port, they're loaded onto a galley. A ship's manifest discovered in 1987 in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace lists them not by name, but by number. Religious captives, female, 18. Destination, imperial household. Purpose, domestic service and conversion. The voyage lasts 12 days. Storms lash the deck. The women who have never seen the ocean vomit until there's nothing left. At night, Magdalena whispers psalms beneath her breath. Her voice is faint, barely audible over the crashing waves. But the other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, chained beside them, turn their heads to listen. When the ship enters the Bosphorus, the sisters see Constantinople rise before them. Domes, minarets, walls that seem to stretch forever. The city gleams like a blade. They're marched through narrow streets. People stop to stare. Christian nuns among the captives are rare, even in an empire built on conquest. They're led past the ancient walls, through the imperial district, past gardens where fountains sing, and then, in the shadow of Hagia Sophia, the great church that is now a mosque, they're forced to stop. To kneel. As the call to prayer echoes from the minarets, one of the sisters whispers, "We are home." But it is no longer ours. They're taken to the palace, but not to the grand halls. Not to the courtyards where ambassadors walk. They're taken beneath. Down stone steps that spiral into darkness. Through tunnels that smell of damp and decay. To a place that doesn't officially exist. In 2011, during restoration work beneath Topkapi Palace, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they found stopped them cold. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, were crosses. Dozens of them, small, crude, carved with fingernails or shards of broken pottery. And beneath those crosses, etched in Latin, 4 words, Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. This was their chapel. For months, maybe years, these women lived beneath the palace. By day, they worked as silent servants, scrubbing floors, washing linens, tending fires for rooms they would never enter. At night, when the palace lay silent, they gathered in a hidden chamber and prayed. No priest, no altar, no Bible, only memory. Psalms surfaced from half-forgotten recollections, reshaped into prayers that sustained them. They shared stolen bread and water from palace wells, carving their faith into stone, one scratch at a time, unseen by all. Archaeologists later found Magdalena's mark, a small bird etched in the corner, beside 23 lines, one for each sister, only 11 complete. Broken pottery held candles, scraps of linen became an altar cloth, a shard of mirror, a crude cross. A Venetian prisoner in 1478 recalled women singing in Latin. Beneath the harem, dismissed as myth until the chapel appeared. But here's what breaks your heart. The crosses stop. Halfway through the wall, the scratches become erratic. Desperate, the lines deepen as if carved with more force, more urgency, then nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 mention a cleansing of the palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone deemed unproductive or resistant was removed. No details, no names, no burial sites. Just one line in a ledger, written in neat Ottoman script, disposed. The nuns of St. Catherine vanished from history. 18 women who had walked 7 days through hell, who had crossed the sea in chains, who had carved prayers into stone in the dark. Gone, but their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1712 wrote about a rumor among palace servants that on certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls, the air would grow cold. And if you listened closely, you could hear women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as superstition. But the walls don't lie. When the archaeologists examined the chapel more closely, they found traces of wax. Not from Ottoman candles, but from an older source, mixed with herbs. The kind of candles nuns made in convents, which means they kept their vigil for longer than anyone thought possible. Months, maybe years. Carving crosses, whispering prayers, refusing to disappear. Magdalena's bird was the last mark on the wall. Beside it, scratched so faintly it almost wasn't there. 2 words in Greek. We endure. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922. 600 years of conquest and power. They rewrote maps, languages, entire cultures. They ruled from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But they couldn't erase 18 women who scratched prayers into stone. Think about that. An empire with armies, cannons, endless resources, and the will to reshape the world. Against women with nothing but fingernails and faith. And the women won. Not in the way empires measure victory. They didn't reclaim their convent. They didn't convert their captors. They didn't live to see freedom. But they left a mark. History is written by the victors, but memory is written by the survivors. And sometimes survival looks like a cross carved in the dark where no one was supposed to see it. A prayer whispered in a language the conquerors tried to silence. A bird scratched into stone to remember the sisters who fell. Centuries later, we found it anyway. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." These women lived forward into darkness. They walked 7 days, knowing they might not survive. They crossed the sea in chains, knowing what waited on the other side. They descended into tunnels, knowing they might never see sunlight again, but they carved their prayers anyway, trusting that someone, someday, would look backward and find them. You just did. In 2011, when the archaeologists stood in that hidden chapel staring at those crosses, one of them asked a question that haunts me still. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax traces suggest years. The depth of some carvings suggests desperate, repeated effort, which means these women gathered night after night, year after year, in absolute darkness, and refused to stop believing, even when sisters disappeared, even when the scratches on the wall stopped growing, even when hope should have died. They kept carving. That's not just faith. That's defiance in its purest form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved in 1922. Its sultans are dust. Its armies are memory. The palace still stands, but it's a museum. Tourists walk its halls, taking pictures. unaware of what lies beneath their feet. But those crosses remain, and that Latin phrase, barely visible after 5 centuries, still speaks. Lux in tenebris, lucet. The light shines in the darkness. It's from the Gospel of John, a verse about light that cannot be extinguished, about truth that survives even when everything else is taken away. Sister Magdalena carved those words knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would be forgotten, knowing the world would move on without her. But she carved them anyway, because she understood something that empires never do. You can conquer land. You can rewrite history. You can erase names from ledgers and bury bodies in unmarked graves. But you cannot kill what people carry inside them. And you cannot silence what they carve into stone. The nuns of St. Catherine were meant to disappear. That was the plan. Erase them. Break them. Turn them into ghosts or converts or footnotes in Ottoman ledgers. But they didn't disappear. They're still here, in those crosses, in that Latin phrase, in the chapel that archaeologists found 500 years later, and now they're here with you, because you listened, because you remembered, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.